The desert stretched endlessly, a golden sea under the merciless blaze of the sun, shimmering like molten glass and breathing heat into every corner of the earth. On the horizon, red rocks rose like ancient guardians, their jagged silhouettes whispering secrets of forgotten times. Among the wagons, creaking westward, moved a solitary figure, a young widow whose blue eyes carried the weight of sorrow, and yet within them flickered a spark that refused to die. Sarah McKenna drew her shawl close, though the air burned, and in that single gesture was written all her contradictions. Fragile, yet enduring, weary, yet still standing. She had left behind not only a house reduced to ash, but the man she had once promised forever to, a man now buried beneath Missouri soil. The wagon train tolerated her presence, but she felt the invisible distance, the way whispers cut through the canvas at night. A woman alone is a burden, a curse, a shadow of bad luck. Still, she walked forward, step after blistered step, as if destiny had woven her into the desert's tapestry. At night, when the fire cracked against the silence and coyotes sang to the moon, Sarah would sit apart, her thoughts drifting like smoke. She remembered Thomas's letters, the feel of his hand, and yet she could not silence the ache that life, cruel, merciless life, had thrust her into a path that seemed both exile and summons. Something in the desert called to her, healing and haunting at once, as though unseen spirits brushed against her skin and whispered promises of transformation. She clung to that strange sensation, the belief that even in ruins, love might someday find her again, not as it had been, but reborn from ashes. The journey was not kind. Dust clung to her lashes, thirst burned her throat, and the long stretch of plains tested every ounce of resolve. Yet it was within this very crucible of suffering that Sarah felt a shift, quiet, imperceptible, but real. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the land itself conspired to unveil a story greater than her grief. The others in the wagon train feared the Apache territory ahead, their stories thick with blood and terror, but Sarah sensed more, that somewhere in the wild expanse, fate waited, sharpening its blade, ready to cut her life open and remake it. When the attack came, it was not the Apache as they had feared, but white bandits cloaked in dust and cruelty. Fire lit the wagons, screams tore into the sky, and chaos devoured order. Sarah's trembling hands fumbled with her late husband's rifle, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. But destiny had other plans. Arrows hissed through the smoke, fierce and swift, striking down the bandits who sought her life. And amid the madness, she saw him for the first time, a warrior standing like a shadow against the flames, dark eyes fierce yet heavy with unspoken sorrow. A stranger whose presence both unsettled and steadied her, whose tomahawk sang through the air and carved her survival out of the night. She clutched a bloodied child against her chest, shielding her small body with her own, bracing for death that never came. Instead, she looked up into those unreadable eyes, and for a fleeting heartbeat, the world went still. No bandits, no wagons, no screams, only the pounding of her heart and the sight of a man who seemed both danger and deliverance. Then he vanished back into the smoke, leaving behind a mark invisible to all but her soul. In that moment, Sarah did not know her path had already shifted. She did not know the storm that would hurl her into his arms, nor the ancient law that would bind her to him against her will. But somewhere, deep in her spirit, a wound began to ache with something startlingly close to hope. Love, unexpected and forbidden, was stirring in the ashes of her loss, waiting like hidden water beneath desert stone. The desert does not grant blessings easily, yet for those who endure its cruelty, it sometimes offers miracles disguised as trials. Sarah's trial had only begun, and with it, the story of a heart learning to burn anew. If this story touches something within you, if the rhythm of her journey heals even a corner of your own heart, leave a thought below, share where you are listening from, and let this tale connect us across the miles. Your presence, your voice, your support keeps these stories alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me, because what comes next will not only test Sarah's strength, but awaken a love powerful enough to defy the world. The night after the ambush lay heavy on Sarah's chest, as if the very air had thickened with sorrow and smoke. The wagons smouldered in ruin, wheels splintered, canvas torn to ribbons, and the cries of the bereaved echoing like wounded ghosts. She had helped carry the wounded to what little shelter remained, her dress still stained with the blood of a child she had saved. She stood apart, her hands trembling though she forced them still, because to collapse would be to admit the weight of it all, that she was alone now, truly alone, without wagon, without horse, without the few belongings that tethered her to the world she once knew. The others, broken families, looked upon her with the same guarded distance as before, only deeper now. They would not take her in. She had become, in their eyes, a cursed woman, marked twice by violence. As each family rejected her plea for space beside them, a quiet dignity rose stubbornly within her chest. "I will walk," she said, her voice calm, though her heart splintered. And so, when the wagons creaked forward into the desert twilight, Sarah trudged behind them, her boots filling with sand, her body already weary from grief. The horizon bled red and gold, colors that seemed both beautiful and cruel, a painting brushed with fire across the vast sky. Each step was a prayer whispered to the earth, a healing rhythm she clung to. One foot, then the other. Keep moving. Breathe. The desert, harsh as it was, began to murmur back. The wind carried sage and dust, the scent of survival and memory. Somewhere in that wild perfume, she felt Thomas, as though his presence lingered with her for a heartbeat, soothing her with the gentlest reminder that she was not meant to die here, not yet. But the desert has its own trials, and soon the wagon train became distant specks, swallowed by night. Thirst clawed at her throat, her legs burned, and at last she stumbled, palms tearing on stone. Lying there, the vast sky above her unfurled its endless darkness, stars glittering like icy embers. She whispered to them as one might to old friends, begging for strength, for mercy. Perhaps death would not be such a cruel companion, she thought, if it meant release from the relentless ache inside her chest. It was then the storm came. Out of the north, the desert rose in fury, a wall of dust and sand roaring like some beast of judgment. Sarah curled into herself, shawl pulled tight over her face, lungs straining to breathe through the suffocating grit. The earth seemed to shudder with each blast of wind, as though creation itself sought to erase her footprints, her very existence. She thought of Thomas again, of home, of what it might mean to simply vanish into the storm, returning to the silence from which all things come. But fate had not finished with her. Hooves thundered near, muffled yet undeniable against the howling wind. Rough hands gripped her shoulders, lifting her from the sand where she had nearly become part of it. Panic flooded her veins. She struck out weakly, fists connecting with a body solid as carved stone. A voice rumbled low, foreign yet oddly soothing, words in Apache she could not understand, then broken English. "Storm bad. You die. Come." It was him, the warrior whose eyes had found hers in the chaos of the bandit attack. Now, closer, she saw his face carved by strength, his eyes dark as midnight, but softened by something she could not name. With no strength left to resist, she felt herself lifted onto his horse, her body drawn against his chest, wrapped in a blanket that held the scent of leather, smoke, and sage. His heart beat steadily against her back, a rhythm strong and healing, lulling her with its certainty, even as the storm shrieked around them. Sarah's thoughts blurred, drifting on the edge of sleep. The desert's rage faded to the sound of his low voice, speaking not to her, but to the spirits, or perhaps to the horse itself. The words meant nothing, but the tone, deep, resonant, unexpectedly gentle, wove into her bones like a lullaby. Her body, torn between fear and exhaustion, surrendered at last. She slept against him, unconscious of what ancient law her surrender had just invoked. When she woke, it was to warmth, not the harsh heat of the sun, but the softer warmth of furs beneath her body, the murmur of voices outside, children laughing, the bark of dogs, confusion and dread tangled in her chest. She sat up inside a dome of bent saplings covered with hides, her boots neatly placed beside her, water and food waiting as if someone had cared for her in the night. An elderly woman entered, her hair braided and beaded, her eyes sharp as an eagle's. "You wake," the woman said in accented English. "Good. Drink." Sarah obeyed, water sweet upon her parched tongue, and whispered thanks. But outside, commotion grew, a gathering of the people, their voices rising in argument. She pushed aside the hide flap and saw him again, standing firm in the circle of his tribe. The man who had carried her through the storm, now called Standing Wolf. His face was unreadable stone, yet when his gaze caught hers, something flickered, a connection undeniable, though she wished it otherwise. The argument swirled. Some cried that her presence would bring soldiers and death, others muttered of old laws. And then, with words heavy as fate, the shaman declared, because she had slept against Standing Wolf's chest through the storm without rope or force, because she had trusted him with her life, she was his woman now, his wife. The crowd fell silent. Sarah's heart thrashed. She shouted her refusal, her disbelief, but the voices of the people overpowered her. Choices, the elder woman whispered, are made not only by words, but by actions. In the eyes of the Apache, her place was sealed. The desert had delivered her from death, only to bind her to a man she barely knew, in a world that was not her own. Standing Wolf's eyes never left hers, steady and impenetrable. And though fear coiled within her, another sensation, strange, fragile, healing, moved beneath it, as though the storm had carried her not to ruin, but to the beginning of something far greater than she could yet see. Her trial, her struggle, her story with him had only begun. Sarah stood frozen in the center of the Apache camp, the weight of countless eyes pressing upon her like a physical force. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might split her chest. The shaman's words still echoed, an iron chain twisting around her. Wife, His wife, not by choice, not by vow, but by an old law that seemed both incomprehensible and inescapable. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear through the ring of strangers until she reached freedom. Yet her legs trembled, rooted to the dust, while Standing Wolf's dark gaze held her captive in a way no rope ever could. The crowd began to disperse, whispers trailing like smoke. Some faces gleamed with curiosity, others with thinly veiled hostility. A few mothers pulled their children back, as though her very presence threatened them. Sarah's breaths came shallow, each one tasting of sage and ash. She wanted to deny it, to undo what had been declared, but the law of this place was not hers to command. The desert had its own language, its own bonds, and she had walked straight into them. The old woman, sage mother, touched her arm gently. "Come," she murmured. "Food, clothes. You need strength." Sarah wanted to shake her off, to declare that nothing could make her accept this fate. Yet her body was weak, her throat raw, and hunger gnawed through her defiance. She followed, her steps slow, through the camp, alive with murmurs. The Apache children peered at her wide-eyed, fascinated by the pale-haired woman thrust into their world. Sarah avoided their gaze, ashamed and furious all at once. Inside the shelter, Sage Mother placed moccasins and a hide dress before her. "White woman's clothes no good here," she said softly. "These better." Sarah resisted at first, clutching her torn dress as though it tethered her to her past. But she remembered the desert's merciless sun, the long days of walking, her skin already blistered. With trembling hands, she dressed in the soft deerskin, the garment whispering against her body like a second skin. She felt stripped of the last fragments of her old life, yet strangely protected, wrapped in something earthy and enduring. The old woman's voice turned quieter, weighted with memory. "Standing Wolf is good man, strong, but pain lives in him. First wife, Little Dove, killed with their child by white soldiers 3 winters past. Since then he swore never to take another, yet he brought you. Spirits work strange ways." Sarah stiffened. Her heart ached at the thought of a man already carved by grief, yet she did not want to feel compassion. Compassion was dangerous. Compassion softened walls she needed to keep high. When the sun reached its zenith, the shaman struck his drum, the sound reverberating like a heartbeat across the camp. "Now test begins," Sage Mother whispered. 7 sons. If you run, hide, refuse his help, you are free. If he finds you, brings you back, gives water, food, shelter, marriage true. Sarah's stomach dropped. 7 days, alone in the desert, hunted by a master tracker. The very thought was despair wrapped in hopelessness. Still, pride burned in her veins. "I will not be his wife," she muttered under her breath, clinging to that resolve like a lifeline. The moment the drum's last echo faded, she ran. The camp blurred behind her, voices fading into silence as her boots pounded against stone and sand. Her lungs burned with each breath, but she did not stop. She scrambled behind jagged rocks, clung to shadows, desperate to outwit him. For hours she wandered, each step heavier, her throat aching for water. The desert mocked her with endless stretches of heat, the sky vast and merciless. Night came like a silver blade, cutting through her determination. Stars sprawled above, brilliant and cold. Coyotes howled in the distance, their voices chilling her spine. She curled into herself, clutching the water-skin Sage Mother had given her. Sleep came fitful, filled with dreams of Thomas, of fire, of the warrior's unreadable eyes. When dawn painted the sky with fire, Sarah pressed on, refusing to yield. Yet the desert was merciless. By the fourth day, her lips cracked, her skin blistered, and her strength faltered. She stumbled through dry brush, dizzy, until her legs gave out. She collapsed behind a cluster of willows, vision blurred, breath shallow. She thought of her mother's Bible, lost in the flames. She thought of Thomas's smile, fading into the dust of memory. She whispered a prayer into the sand, ready to let go. And then he was there. Standing wolf, silent as shadow, strong as stone. His figure blocked the burning sun, his face calm yet unreadable. He knelt beside her, his hands steady as he lifted her frail body into his arms. She wanted to fight, to push him away, but she could not even lift her hand. Instead, her head fell against his chest, the steady drum of his heart thundering in her ear. Her world narrowed to his warmth, his scent of leather and sage, the undeniable reality of his strength. He carried her back to camp without a word, her shame heavy as her exhaustion. In her failure, she had lost not only the trial, but the illusion of choice. The law would now claim her fully, his wife in the eyes of his people. Yet, as he laid her gently upon furs, covering her with a blanket, she felt a flicker of something unexpected, not triumph in his silence, but restraint. He had not gloated, had not forced her gaze. He had only saved her, without demand, without judgment. The days that followed were heavy with suspicion. The people called her White Witch, cursed her presence, avoided her shadow. Only Sage Mother offered her kindness, teaching her words, showing her roots and herbs. Standing Wolf remained distant, sleeping outside the shelter, speaking little. Yet his shadow lingered, always near, as if he was both her jailer and her shield. And then one morning, when a child was carried into camp, bleeding from a mountain cat's claws, Sarah's hands moved before her fear could stop them. She had knowledge of healing, of stitching wounds, of easing pain. With Standing Wolf's command silencing the doubters, she worked, her hands steady despite the eyes upon her. The child lived, and for the first time, gratitude softened the faces around her. That night, she sat alone beneath the stars, exhaustion easing into something almost like peace. Standing, Wolf's gaze found her across the firelight, dark and unreadable. For a long moment, neither looked away. Something fragile sparked between them, unspoken, unformed, yet real. The desert had claimed her, reshaped her, bound her against her will. But within its harshness, threads of healing wove quietly, binding sorrow to survival, stranger to stranger, heart to heart. And though Sarah told herself she still hated the bond forced upon her, somewhere deep within, a different truth stirred like a hidden spring beneath dry stone. Something had begun. The drought came like a curse, settling over the land with a weight that pressed on every living thing. For weeks no rain fell, and the riverbeds shrank to cracked ribbons of mud. Dust clung to Sarah's lips, her skin burned from the relentless sun, and the air itself felt like fire in her lungs. Even the strongest warriors moved slower, conserving energy, their faces etched with quiet worry. Children whimpered at night from thirst, and mothers whispered prayers into the silence, begging the spirits for mercy. Sarah felt it too, the gnawing ache of thirst that no small sip could ease, yet she refused to sink into despair. She searched the dry washes with Sage Mother, learning to read the land in new ways, where sage still grew green among stones, where insects swarmed, where the earth's scent shifted faintly to promise hidden water. Her hands became calloused, her dress torn, her skin stained with earth. But in the rhythm of searching and learning, something inside her began to heal. It was as if the desert itself, cruel and unforgiving, taught her to endure, to bend without breaking. Tension grew sharper when a hunting party returned with news. Settlers had dammed a stream that once fed a sacred spring. Arguments rose like wildfire. Black Crow demanded they tear the dam apart, while Chief Nietzsche warned such an act would only bring soldiers upon them. Voices clashed, tempers frayed, and Sarah sat silently at the edge of the council, listening. It was then Standing Wolf spoke, his voice steady, carrying authority she had not heard before. "There is another spring," he said, "hidden in the canyon lands. The old ones showed me when I was a boy. If it flows still, it may save us." Eyes turned to him, some doubtful, some hopeful. Sarah felt her heart tighten when his gaze found hers across the firelight. Later, when preparations were made, he came to her directly. "You come," he said, "not as command, but as certainty. Desert has taught you. You see signs." She wanted to argue, to remind him she was not truly one of them, but the words died on her tongue. Something deeper than pride told her she belonged on this journey. At dawn they rode, a small group, Standing Wolf, Sarah, 2 young warriors, and Sage Mother, who insisted that old eyes could guide where youth faltered. The ride was grueling, the canyon walls closing around them like vast red cathedrals of stone. Heat shimmered off the rocks, every breath dry as ash. Yet Sarah felt strangely alive. She had learned to ride without saddle, to move with the horse instead of against it, and the rhythm soothed her, a healing pulse that steadied her thoughts. By midday, hope wavered. The canyon twisted endlessly, each turn leading only to more silence. Then Standing Wolf lifted a hand. "Listen," he murmured. At first, Sarah heard only her own heartbeat, the scrape of hooves against rock. Then, faint, fragile, the sound of trickling water. They followed it, and there, tucked in the stone, a pool shimmered like a miracle. Sarah's heart leapt, but she caught Standing Wolf's caution. Kneeling, she tested the water as Dr. Morrison had once taught her, checking for smell, taste, clarity. At last she nodded. "It's good. Safe." Relief washed over them all, but the spring was weak, its trickle barely enough for a handful of families. "We need to know why," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "Water this clean comes from somewhere higher. Something blocks it." Her words startled the men, yet Standing Wolf's eyes softened with something like admiration. "You think like Apache now," he told her quietly. They climbed higher, the rocks scorching their hands. At last, Broken Hand discovered it. A rock slide had sealed the spring's heart. Immense boulders loomed above, immovable as despair. The younger warriors shook their heads, but Sarah studied the heap with fierce determination. "That stone," she said, pointing to one lodged like a keystone. "If it shifts, the rest will follow." Danger shimmered in the idea, yet Standing Wolf nodded. "We try." Together they worked, ropes cutting into their palms, shoulders screaming, horses straining as they pulled. Hours stretched into eternity. Dust coated their skin, and Sarah's hands bled, yet she refused to stop. Then, with a groan that echoed through the canyon, the boulder shifted. "Run!" Standing Wolf cried, dragging Sarah with him as the rocks tumbled, crashing in a thunder of stone. For a breathless moment, silence followed. Then came the sound, pure, strong, glorious. Water burst free, spilling down the cliff face, filling the pool below with a song that made the canyon itself seem to breathe again. Sarah fell to her knees, tears mixing with dust on her cheeks. Around her, warriors stared not only at the water, but at her. She had been part of this miracle, and they knew it. Even Broken Hand bowed his head in respect. Sage Mother murmured a blessing, her eyes glinting with ancient knowing. That night they camped by the spring. Exhaustion wrapped them all, yet Sarah could not sleep. She sat beside the pool, listening to its gentle music. Standing Wolf joined her, silent at first, his presence grounding as stone. At last he removed a leather pouch from his neck, pulling forth a small carved bird of blue stone. "This was Little Dove's," he said, his voice low, each word heavy with memory. "She wore it on our wedding day. I would like you to have it." Sarah's breath caught. "I can't," she whispered, trembling at the weight of what he offered. But he pressed it into her palm, his dark eyes unflinching. "You have eagle heart," he said. "See far, fly high. Little Dove would understand." Tears burned her eyes as she closed her fingers around the token. She asked him then about Little Dove, about their daughter, Morning Star, about the day grief carved him hollow. He spoke, his words carrying pain yet also release, as if speaking to her unburdened what he had carried alone too long. She touched the scars on his arm, the invisible wounds in his voice, and whispered, "Spirits did not bury your heart. They kept it, waiting for this moment." His hand covered hers, warmth steady and healing. For a long while they sat without words, their souls speaking in silence. When laughter broke from Sage Mother's sleep across the camp, they smiled at the same instant, fragile but real. That night they lay side by side beneath the stars, the sound of water lulling them into dreams. Sarah clutched the carved bird, its smooth edges pressing into her skin, a reminder that even in loss, life could carve beauty anew. For the first time, she did not think of escape, nor of the world she had left behind. She thought only of the man beside her, of the desert that had nearly killed her, yet now offered healing, of the strange and tender truth blooming where she least expected. The spring had been freed from stone. So too, perhaps, had their hearts. The days after the spring's discovery wove themselves into a fragile pattern of survival and quiet change. The Apache returned with news of water, and though suspicion towards Sarah still lingered, something had shifted. No longer was she merely the white woman who had stumbled into their midst. She had stood in the sun beside their warriors, strained her body to breaking, and bled into the same dust they bled into. Whispers carried her name differently now, not as curse, but as question, as possibility. Yet mistrust does not vanish in an instant. Many women still walked wide circles around her, pulling their children close. Warriors watched her with cold eyes, their silence sharp as knives. The cruelest words came from Black Crow, who muttered, "White Witch," when he thought she could not hear, accusing her of spying, of bringing soldiers. His hatred clung to her like a shadow. Still, she held her head high, though loneliness ached in her chest like an old wound. It was in healing that Sarah found her place. When little Hawk, a boy of 8, was carried back from a hunt mauled by a mountain cat, panic surged through the camp. His small leg bled freely, his face pale, his mother weeping over him. The medicine woman, Singing River, was away, and despair threatened to claim the boy. Sarah's hands moved before fear could stop her. She demanded boiled water, cloth, herbs. Voices rose in protest, but Standing Wolf silenced them with a command. His presence stood behind her like a shield, his authority lending weight to her trembling courage. She worked quickly, steady as she had once been under Dr. Morrison's tutelage back in Missouri. She cleaned the wounds, packed herbs to stave infection, bound them tightly, but not so much as to cut life from the limb. Sweat stung her eyes, but she pressed on, murmuring soothing words to the boy, though he could not understand her tongue. When at last the bleeding slowed and his breath eased, she lifted her head to silence. Dozens of eyes rested upon her. The boy's mother touched Sarah's hand with gratitude, whispering words through tears. Standing Wolf translated softly, "She says, thank you." It was a beginning. Slowly, others came. A woman with a festering cut shyly extended her hand for Sarah's help. A child with fever was brought to her. Singing River returned and studied her with suspicion, yet chose not to scorn. Instead, she watched, tested, and finally spoke. White medicine. Apache medicine. Both have power. Together, stronger. From then on, they worked side by side. Sarah learned to recognize desert plants that soothed pain, roots that cooled fever, leaves that cleansed wounds. In return, she showed Singing River ways of boiling cloth, of cleaning hands, of stitching wounds with care. Their alliance did not erase the gulf between worlds, but it bridged it enough for trust to begin. Children, always the first to forgive, drifted near her. Their laughter brightened the camp again. They followed when she gathered herbs, giggling when she stumbled over Apache words. She let them braid her hair with beads, their small hands weaving joy into strands heavy with dust. It healed her in ways she could not name, a balm against the loneliness that had hollowed her since Missouri. Yet danger lurked still. One evening, as she walked back from aiding a difficult birth, Black Crow stepped from the shadows. His face burned with anger, his knife glinting in the fading light. "You think you fool us," he hissed in broken English. "Help children, play healer, but I know what you are. Spy. You count warriors, learn ways, then run to soldiers." His words struck like lashes, and Sarah's heart thundered. She denied it, voice trembling yet firm, but his sneer deepened. "You should have died in desert. Standing Wolf made mistake." "Maybe I fix it." The knife lifted, and for one breath she thought her life would end. Then the shadows shifted, and Standing Wolf appeared, silent as the night itself. He stepped between them, back to her, facing Black Crow with lethal stillness. Words passed in Apache, sharp and dangerous, though she could not understand them. The tension coiled like a bowstring, ready to snap. At last, Black Crow spat on the ground and stalked away, hatred in every line of his body. Sarah exhaled, knees weak. "Thank you," she whispered into the twilight. Standing Wolf turned, his face unreadable, yet his eyes lingered on her. "You helped Little Hawk," he said. "Why? They are not your people." Sarah met his gaze with quiet strength. A hurt child is a hurt child. It doesn't matter what language he speaks. For the first time, something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, of respect. "Your heart is good," he said softly. After that night, he no longer kept his distance entirely. And he still slept outside the wickiup most evenings, but sometimes she woke to find him within, his presence steady as stone. He brought her stones he found in the hills, knowing she liked to collect them. He asked simple questions about her healing, about her knowledge, as though testing her truths. She began to notice the way his gaze lingered when he thought she wasn't watching, the way silence between them softened from coldness into something alive. One evening, as coyotes howled and the fire painted his face in amber, Sarah realized that trust had begun to grow where fear once lived. It was fragile, like the first green shoot pushing through scorched earth, but it was real. She thought of the spring they had freed together, how water had burst forth when stone gave way. Perhaps hearts were the same. Perhaps even the hardest could break open if pressed by love and loss, if touched by something greater than themselves. The desert had given her sorrow and chains, but it was also giving her something else, a chance to heal, to matter, to love again. She lay that night beneath the buffalo hides, listening to the steady rhythm of Standing Wolf's breath outside. She pressed the carved bird he had given her against her chest, its smooth edges grounding her. The world beyond the desert no longer pulled at her as it once had. What called her now was here, in this land, in the quiet bond forming between a widow who had lost everything and a warrior who had vowed never to love again. The night was deep, the stars endless, and though the future loomed uncertain, Sarah felt peace steal into her bones. Somewhere beyond the fire, Standing Wolf stirred, as if he too had sensed the thread binding them. Neither spoke, yet in the silence something healing took root, fragile but alive, waiting for the day it would grow strong enough to endure every storm. The whispers of Sarah's survival spread like sparks carried by the desert wind, leaping from camp to camp until they reached the frontier towns. Soon, twisted stories painted her not as a woman who had chosen to remain, but as a captive who needed rescue. Soldiers were said to be gathering, ready to ride out and reclaim her from savages. The Apache camp shifted uneasily with each rumor. Mothers clutched their children tighter, warriors sharpened weapons, their glances darker than the moonless nights. Even Chief Nietzsche's voice carried a weary gravity. The white world would not forgive, and they would not listen. Black Crow, never missing a chance to stoke fear, declared her presence a curse. He spat her name like poison, warning that death would fall upon them because of her. The words cut deep, though she held her chin high, refusing to show the sting. What kept her from breaking was not the whispers of hate, but the silence of one man, the silence of Standing Wolf, whose eyes found hers across fires, across days, across the restless nights where trust grew quietly in the shadows. One evening, Samuel Morrison arrived with hired guns, his face familiar yet sharpened with greed and possession. "Sarah McKenna," he called, as though claiming her with his voice alone, "we've come to rescue you." Rescue. The word fell wrong in her ears. She stepped forward, every gaze upon her, and saw the glint in Samuel's eyes, not love, not kinship, but ownership. His hand reached for hers, but she drew back, her voice steady despite the tremor of her heart. "I am not going with you, Samuel. I am home." Gasps rippled through both Apache and white men alike. Samuel's face twisted with disbelief, then anger. He accused her of being bewitched, of forgetting her blood. He sneered at Standing Wolf, hurling insults meant to wound. Violence trembled in the air, weapons shifting, hearts pounding. Sarah's breath caught as she realized what her choice would cost. But then clarity struck like lightning. If she wavered now, lives would be lost. She stepped into the silence and raised her voice so all could hear. "Yes, I am his wife," she declared, the words flowing like water over stone, sure and unyielding. "By my own choice, no force, no chains. I spoke vows in this camp, witnessed by spirits older than your laws. I belong here." She touched the blue bird carving at her throat, feeling its warmth against her skin. "Here, I am valued. Here, I am loved." The last word slipped from her unbidden, but she did not take it back. The ground itself seemed to shift with her confession. Standing Wolf stood behind her, close enough she could feel his presence like a shield, like sunlight breaking through storm. Samuel's fury cracked, his words sharp with disdain. "You're making a mistake. No decent white man will have you after this." Sarah lifted her chin, her voice soft but filled with steel. "Good. I already have the only man I want." The gunslingers muttered, urging Samuel to leave, and at last he mounted his horse, curses trailing like dust in the wind. Sarah stood tall, though her knees trembled, and when she finally turned, Standing Wolf's eyes met hers. There was no mocking, no gloating, only a depth that seemed to reach into her very soul. That night, Chief Nietzsche summoned her. "Your words today saved bloodshed," he told her gravely, "but they also seal your fate. The white world will not forgive. You are ours now, not in dress only, but in spirit. Will you take the ceremony and bind yourself to him truly by both our traditions?" Sarah did not falter. Her heart, though bruised by fear, beat with certainty. "Yes," she answered. "I choose him." The days that followed swirled with preparations. Women wove her wedding dress from soft doeskin, adorned with cones that would sing when she moved, beads telling stories of endurance and transformation. Sage Mother bathed her in the river, instructing her to speak her griefs aloud so the water might carry them away. Thomas's death, the loss of her home, the ache of abandonment. She whispered them all, and when she rose from the cold current, shivering but lighter, Standing Wolf waited on the bank, wrapping her in a blanket, his eyes tender with understanding. "Feel different?" he asked softly. "Empty," she whispered, then corrected, "No, ready, ready to be filled." On the morning of the ceremony, he returned from his solitary journey into the desert, carrying an ancient necklace turquoise and shell beads strung with fetishes from the old ones. "Spirit said it waited for you," he told her, his voice hushed. "For woman who bridges worlds." She trembled as he placed it in her hands, feeling the pulse of history, of belonging. At sunset, the camp gathered in a great circle, fire burning at its heart. Sarah entered from the east, Standing Wolf from the west. Their steps met at the fire, and together they walked its circle 4 times, one for each direction. His vows, spoken first in Apache, then in English, carried the strength of mountains, to protect, to provide, to share joy and sorrow until the last star fell. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clear, in halting Apache and fluent English, promising trust, loyalty, and tomorrow. Then came the unexpected. The chief produced a weathered Bible, kept from trade long ago. "White woman's tradition must be honored also," he said. Standing Wolf repeated the vows of her childhood faith, words she had once spoken to another but now spoke anew, their meaning forged in fire and loss. Tears blurred her vision as she echoed them, not as prisoner but as woman reborn. When the chief pronounced them married, the camp erupted in joy. Dancers sang, children laughed, and despite the looming threat of soldiers, celebration burned brighter than fear. That night, Sarah and Standing Wolf sat by the fire in their wickiup, gifts of blankets and pottery around them, the smoke carrying prayers to the stars. He touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. "No more doubt," he murmured. She leaned into his hand, her voice steady as her heart. "No more. I choose you every day." Outside, thunder rumbled across the desert, the first promise of rain in months. Sarah smiled, her head resting against his chest as the sky broke open at last. The drought was ending, and within her something else bloomed. Love, fierce and healing, strong enough to face whatever storms would come. Dawn had barely kissed the canyon walls when the first crack of rifle fire tore the fragile morning apart. Sarah woke to chaos, the sharp scent of gunpowder burning the air, the shrieks of terrified horses, the war cries of Apache warriors rushing to defend their families. She stumbled to her feet, clutching the blue bird pendant at her throat, her wedding dress still heavy with the scent of smoke and sage from the ceremony that had sealed her choice only days before. Standing Wolf was already at the canyon's mouth, rifle in hand, his voice steady as he called orders in Apache. The warriors moved like shadows, each knowing his place in the dance of battle. Sarah's heart hammered with fear, but she did not collapse into helplessness. She gathered the women, dragging the wounded into the shelters, her hands moving with practiced urgency. Singing River shouted for herbs, for boiled water, and Sarah obeyed. Her own fingers soon stained red with the blood of warriors she bound and children she soothed. The canyon that had felt like sanctuary became a trap. Soldiers rained bullets from the rim above, their shadows cutting against the light. The Apache fought with fierce cunning, but they were outnumbered, each volley thinning their strength. By midday the ground was littered with broken arrows, shattered rock, and bodies. Sarah's arms ached from carrying, stitching, pressing against wounds. Her wedding dress was torn, stained with blood, but she felt no shame, only the raw will to keep them alive. Then came the voice, booming through a speaking trumpet from the soldiers above. Colonel Wade, known for his cruelty, called down, his words rolling like thunder. "Apache dogs, we know you have the white woman. Surrender her, and we will let the women and children live. You have 1 hour." Every gaze turned toward Sarah. Mothers clutched infants, their eyes filled with silent pleading. Warriors exchanged hard looks, measuring honor against survival. Sarah felt the weight of their stares like stones crushing her chest. She rose, trembling but resolute. "I'll go," she whispered, "if my life can buy theirs." Standing Wolf's hand closed around her arm, his grip fierce as iron. "No," he said, his voice sharp with command. "You are my wife, my people. We do not trade our own for mercy." His eyes burned with certainty, but Sarah saw the torment beneath. She touched his cheek, her hand trembling. "Look at them," she urged. "Look at the children. How many will die for me?" The argument raged. Black Crow, to her surprise, sided with Standing Wolf, his voice cold but honorable. She proved herself at the spring, at the ceremony. To give her up would shame us all. Yet Sarah saw the truth written in every face: desperation. The hour ticked away, hope slipping like water through her hands. It was Ghost Dancer who finally stepped forward, his old eyes gleaming with strange light. "There is another way," he said. "White soldiers crave stories. They want to believe they saved a woman from savages. We give them theater. We give them dead warriors, a captive bride, and when they leave, the dead will rise." His plan was madness, yet it held the only sliver of hope. Warriors volunteered to drink his medicine, their breaths slowed to shadows, their bodies still as corpses. The play began at dusk. Sarah fought Standing Wolf with genuine desperation, striking, screaming, begging for release, her voice breaking the canyon's silence so the soldiers would hear. Standing Wolf, his face carved with grief and pride, let himself fall, his chest rising only with the faintest breath. Sarah's heart cracked as she knelt beside him, pretending to be torn from his grasp, pretending to be saved when all she wanted was to cradle him and never let go. The soldiers swarmed in, their boots trampling the earth. Colonel Wade himself lifted her up, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You're safe now, Mrs. McKenna," he said, as if her life had never been her own. Sarah collapsed against him, feigning weakness, while her gaze darted back to Standing Wolf's still form. The hardest act of her life was not screaming, not betraying the secret that he yet lived. Dragged from the canyon, she watched as the women and children were herded away under promises of mercy, their faces pale, their future uncertain. Behind them, the so-called dead lay strewn in the dust. To the soldiers, it was victory. To Sarah, it was agony, a parting deeper than death. At the fort, she played her role. Her hair was combed, her dress exchanged for proper fabric, her silence mistaken for trauma. Officers' wives whispered pity. Soldiers called her brave. No one saw the fire still burning in her eyes, the vow etched into her very soul. At night, when she lay on clean sheets in the infirmary, she pressed the blue bird carving into her palm until it left marks upon her skin. "He will come," she told herself. "He promised. Wherever they take me, he will find me." And then the signs began. A feather left upon her window ledge, though no hand had been seen. A flicker of light upon the hills, 3 flashes that echoed the call of a nighthawk. Each sign a whisper. "I am near." Hope steadied her heartbeat, healing the fear that had coiled inside her since the canyon. When the wagon train prepared to carry her westward, she felt the promise rippling in the air, like thunder before rain. Soldiers thought they carried her back to civilization, to safety, to the world she had once belonged to. But Sarah knew better. She carried with her not captivity, but the memory of vows spoken under stars and fire, the certainty of a love that would not yield to armies, to distance, to fate itself. That night, as the wagons rolled into the vast silence of the desert, Sarah laid her hand upon the pendant and whispered into the darkness, her voice trembling yet sure, "I am yours, Standing Wolf. Find me." And in the far hills, unseen but certain, a shadow watched, his eyes bright as the stars, waiting for the moment to strike, to reclaim what the world had tried to steal. The desert wind carried her words to him, and though armies marched and storms gathered, the thread between them held strong, an unbroken bond of heart and spirit, fierce enough to heal the wounds of two worlds. The wagon train rattled westward, its wheels creaking under the weight of supplies and soldiers who believed themselves triumphant. Sarah sat inside, hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered as though broken. To them she was the rescued bride, reclaimed from savagery, a symbol to parade through towns as proof of conquest. But beneath her stillness burned a fire no one could see. Her heart was alive, bound by the vow she had spoken beneath desert stars, a vow not even armies could sever. She carried the memory of Standing Wolf's breath against her cheek, the strength of his arms, the way his eyes had promised across silence. "I will find you." By day, she endured the soldiers' chatter, their assumptions, their careless talk of her return to the white world. By night, when the campfire smoke rose to the heavens, she pressed the carved blue bird into her palm, its edges biting into her skin like a tether to the life she refused to release. Sleep came fitful, haunted by dreams of the canyon, of warriors lying still as corpses, of Standing Wolf's body sprawled in the dust, so lifelike in its stillness that she had nearly screamed. Each morning she woke with her chest aching, only to steady herself with the whisper, "He lives. He comes." 3 nights out, the desert sang differently. The horses grew restless, hooves striking sparks against stone. The guards muttered, unsettled by shadows. Sarah, lying awake in the wagon, heard it. A nighthawk's call, repeated 3 times. Her breath caught. She slipped from her blanket, heart pounding with recognition. Then chaos erupted. Horses screamed, breaking their tethers as unseen shapes moved among them. Warriors, few, swift, precise, turned order into disorder. Soldiers ran shouting, their guns flashing against the dark, but the night belonged to those who knew its rhythms. A hand touched her shoulder, strong, sure, achingly familiar. She turned and found herself looking into eyes she had thought she might never see again. Standing Wolf, his face painted in dark strokes, fierce and luminous in the firelight. He smiled faintly, a warrior's smile, sharp as survival, soft as love. "Come," he whispered. She did not hesitate. Gathering her bundle, she ran with him through the chaos, weaving between wagons, her heart beating in time with his steps. Behind them, the shouts of discovery rang out, but they were already gone, swallowed by the desert night. They rode hard until dawn, the desert wind cutting their faces, dust rising beneath the hooves. Black Crow rode beside them, silent yet steady, his eyes grim but no longer hateful. 2 younger warriors followed, fierce and loyal. When at last they sheltered in a hidden canyon, Sarah collapsed against Standing Wolf's chest, her tears soaking the leather at his shoulder. "You came," she whispered. His arms tightened around her, his voice low and steady. "Said I would, always." Yet the world around them was unraveling. The army's reach stretched long, the San Carlos reservation swallowing those captured, its name whispered with dread. Sage Mother and a small band of women and children had fled south, waiting at hidden springs. Ghost Dancer's dream had promised a path westward, toward Sarah's sister in California. The decision lay before them: scatter and vanish, or carve a new life beyond the reach of soldiers. It was Sarah who spoke with conviction. "My sister's ranch lies in the Sierra foothills, isolated. She struggles since her husband died. If we go, not as fugitives, but as workers, as family, she may take us in." The plan was fragile, dangerous. Wanted posters spread through towns, naming Sarah a kidnapped wife, a prize to reclaim. Patrols searched the roads. Telegraphs carried her description far and wide. Yet they pressed on, the desert teaching them endurance once more. Days blurred into nights of hiding, children soothed with whispered stories. Hunger gnawed but never overcame. Through it all, Sarah stood with them, not apart, not tolerated, but one of them. She wore her Apache dress with pride, no longer ashamed of what she had become. At last, after 2 weeks of grueling travel, they reached Martha's ranch. Sarah's heart trembled as her sister's figure appeared at the doorway, older, hardened, but still carrying the echoes of home. Martha's eyes widened, shock flooding her face. "Sarah?" "My God! We thought you were dead." Sarah stepped forward, tears glistening. "I was. The woman you knew died in the desert. I am someone else now." Behind her stood Standing Wolf, Black Crow, Sage Mother, and the children whose eyes pleaded silently. The reunion was not easy. Martha's joy faltered when she saw who Sarah had brought. Questions burned in her gaze, doubts heavy in her silence. But practicality prevailed. The land was vast, the work endless, and Sarah's voice carried quiet strength. "They will work," she said. "They will help. And they are family now." Martha's hesitation softened into weary acceptance, and so began their life in this fragile sanctuary. The Apache women proved their worth, their hands skilled, their knowledge of herbs and healing unmatched. Children cared for animals, their laughter returning music to the ranch. Standing Wolf labored beside Martha's men, his strength steady, his silence unyielding. Even Black Crow, bitter as he was, offered his hands to repair fences, his pride softened by necessity. Slowly, Martha began to see not enemies, but people, wounded yet enduring. Nights became their own kind of peace. Sarah and Standing Wolf sat beneath the wide sky, the mountains rising like guardians in the distance. They spoke of loss and future, of pain and healing. He told her of dreams, the rivers of choice that split and rejoined, the children with golden hair and dark eyes. She told him of her sister's kindness, of the memories of Missouri that no longer chained her. Together they built not just a home, but a bridge between worlds. The love that had begun in storms and shadows bloomed now in labor and laughter. It was not easy. Soldiers still hunted, neighbors still whispered, but each day they lived was defiance, each moment together a healing. Sarah wore the bluebird carving always, its edges warm from her touch, a symbol not of captivity, but of transformation. She was no longer the widow lost in grief, nor the unwilling bride bound by law. She was a woman reborn, burning with life, with love, with the fierce will to stand where two worlds collided. On evenings when coyotes howled in the hills and thunder rumbled over the Sierras, Sarah sat with Standing Wolf, their hands entwined, their silence rich with promise. She looked around at the faces lit by firelight. Martha learning to smile again, sage mother telling stories to children, Black Crow watching with grudging respect. And she knew this was home. Not the one she had left behind, but the one she had chosen, the one she had fought for. And so, her story closed not with defeat, but with triumph carved from pain, with healing that had risen from ashes like a new dawn. She had been unwilling once, but now she burned willingly, fiercely, for love that defied death and distance. She was Sarah, wife of Standing Wolf, sister of Martha, daughter of two worlds. And she was whole. If this journey has touched your heart, if Sarah's healing and strength spoke to something within you, share your thoughts below. I would love to know where you are listening from, what part of her story stirred your soul. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support keeps these tales alive, carrying their warmth across miles and hearts, like embers glowing in the dark. Together, let us keep the fire of stories burning bright.